Rich City Rides, Bike East Bay, the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, and 1,000 riders just celebrated the 5-year anniversary of the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge's bike path. It was an absolutely perfect day in the San Francisco Bay Area, but what hovered above the group like a storm cloud was the very real chance that this path could lose its 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day access. It's the Greenway with Mac, and I have something different for you today, as I am joined by Warren Wells of the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. He is going to discuss why bike and pedestrian access is so important on this bridge, while he shows us the route from the Richmond BART station to the bridge and then into Marin County. Warren, welcome.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Can you tell us what street we are starting on?
So this is 16th Street. This is just the group headed out south from the Richmond BART station. Richmond is kind of the terminus of the red and orange line of BART. And so it's a quick trip down from here to the Richmond Greenway. Just a couple of blocks across McDonald on a pretty calm street. And then you just come down 2 blocks and you find yourself at the Richmond Greenway. Here we are at Unity Park, has a playground, some restrooms, other facilities here. And there's a couple options if you were heading to the bridge. Typically when I would do it, I would make a kind of a tighter right there and go on the Richmond Greenway, which this group does on the way back. But you'll see here, folks crossed through Unity Park and made a right turn, so going westbound straight toward Mount Tamalpais on Ohio Avenue. This is a fun little thing. We're passing by Marina Way South, which is the site of a really exciting new project. It's a 2-way protected bikeway on the west side of Marina Ave, between the Greenway down toward Cutting. It has some fun name, like the Healthy Path or something.
So the Richmond Greenway is parallel to us?
Yeah, the Richmond Greenway runs an old railroad right-of-way. It's just, again, kind of half a block north of the group here. So you could be running on a totally separated path. I actually helped put the route together for this, and with the number of people, it might be easier to be in the street, because on a shared use path, which is only 12 feet wide, you might get spread out pretty far.
And just on a side note, how many times have you made the trip across the bridge?
If you just look at my Strava, it's something around 160 or 170 times. But I've also crossed the bridge on my e-bike a few times, and I haven't recorded those. So more than 150, less than 200.
Do you think you might be the top
No,
user?
No, not even close.
Really?
Yeah. If you look on Strava, there are some people, I don't know if they live in Richmond or San Rafael, but who ride it like every day.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
So nowhere even close. So the Richmond Greenway at this point has ended, and if you were going west to the bridge, you would kind of jog down here onto Ohio, and you see there's a 2-way protected bikeway on the north side, the right side of the street here, that goes those last couple blocks to Richmond Parkway, Girard Boulevard. So yeah, at this point, we're still on Ohio. When we come to a kind of busy intersection, this is one you got to be a little bit careful with because people will pretty frequently run the red light here, unfortunately. So you can turn north here, continue on the Bay Trail, continuing to Richmond, but as we'll see, the group is going to make the left here onto South Girard Boulevard. This street also has a great 2-way protected bikeway on the kind of the northwest side, the right side here. Again, the group is kind of taking the lane because we have so many people. But this is a pretty pleasant ride, what I would consider an all ages and abilities route here on the right, and one I've taken many times. I didn't mention this earlier, so I work for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, but I do live in the East Bay, and so we're kind of on my commute to work. Sometimes I ride all the way along the Bay Trail. Other times, if I want to get some emails done, I'll take BART to Richmond, and then in that case, this is the way that I would be going to the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge.
Okay, and if you were not going through BART, what would be your approach?
It depends on where you're coming from. So I'm coming from Berkeley. So typically I sort of go straight to the Bay Trail. So in my case, I'll either take, Channing to Bancroft down to the Bay Trail, or I'll kind of go up to the Bay Trail at Buchanan Street in Albany, and then get onto the Bay Trail there just north of the Golden Gate racetrack, the former racetrack now. And I would take the Greenway all the way up through Richmond. And you kind of have to do a little cut through in Richmond, and you get into Cutting Boulevard, which also has a nice new protected bikeway. And actually that would take you straight to where we are now, which is the town of Point Richmond, which is in the city of Richmond. So here we're turning onto West Richmond Ave, and then we'll cross the tracks. Sometimes you will get stuck behind a train here. I always leave about 10 minutes early for my meetings, just in case I get stuck behind some freight. And then we'll make a right here onto Railroad Ave, which actually goes past a couple nice little businesses here. This is a nice place to stop if you're hungry on the way back. There's a good burrito place and a good pizza shop here on the left that I would recommend.
And I saw a tunnel back there. Tell me about that.
Well, there are two tunnels. So both those tunnels, I don't know their proper names. Being a nerd about this stuff, I wish I could tell you. But there are two tunnels, one of which is still in use by the railroad. It doesn't actually go anywhere, but it's used when they're making trains and kind of like they'll move the cars back and forth when they're switching up because the BNSF yard is just north of here. And then there's another tunnel, an auto and bike ped tunnel that you can, there's a 2-car lanes, but then there's a protected path above that you can go through to get to Miller-Knox Regional Shoreline, and that's a big park just south of Point Richmond. It's really great views of the bridge and of Mount Tam, a bunch of picnic tables. Oh, actually really fun, there's the Golden Gate Railroad Museum down there, which is a model railroad museum. It's in a big hangar, it's like half an acre or something, it's a big spot. They have a ton of model railroads. I actually took my daughter there a few months ago, and she had a blast. Really fun for either rail fans or for kids. I really recommend it.
If you were going to do this excursion, what could you expect to find on the Marin side and on the Richmond side?
So the Richmond side has a lot of really great stuff pretty close to the bridge. So a few things that I would mention. Point Richmond is a lovely little town. There's a lot of really great restaurants there, coffee shops. It's a nice place to spend some time. And just south of there, I mentioned there's the Miller-Knox Regional Shoreline. Going a little farther east, there's East Brother Brewing Company, which is kind of in near sort of the industrial part of Richmond near the port. There's also the Rosie the Riveter National Historic Front, which is a museum about the ship construction industry and the shipyards that sort of won the war for the U.S. and turned out, build a bunch of the fleet here in Richmond. That's on the Richmond side. On the Marin side, there's not so much so close to the bridge. You do have a couple really important pieces of transportation infrastructure. You have the Larkspur Ferry, which is just about a mile from the end of the bridge. Larkspur SMART station. SMART is the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Agency, which is a train that goes from Larkspur, this is its southern terminus, today all the way up to Santa Rosa. They're working on opening stations in Windsor and then Healdsburg. So if you were kind of trying to take an excursion via bike, you want to get to the North Bay up into wine country and Sonoma County, you could BART to Richmond, take these few miles across the bridge, and then hop on a train. It's a gorgeous ride and takes you all the way up to Sonoma. The train runs about half hourly in peak and hourly off peak, but has trips all weekend. So that's kind of, I would say, one of the great destinations, kind of great transportation tool in Marin. Beyond that, Marin has incredible nature access, whether you're looking to go to Mount Tamalpais or the Headlands, or there's a ton of great stuff. The list would be too long for me to recommend all the things over here.
And there's a ferry on the Richmond side as well, right?
Yeah, and both of the ferries go to the San Francisco Ferry Building.
That was actually how we went home.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
The Larkspur Ferry, yeah.
That's fun.
It was really fun.
Yeah, and they've actually increased frequencies on there, so it's like maybe a ferry every 40 minutes or so, which is very doable.
Yeah, that's great. Tell me about this little section right here.
Yeah, so now we've gone through Point Richmond, and we've gone up onto a protected path on the south side of Tewksbury Drive. This is a super great piece of infrastructure that was implemented, as part of the project to open the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge path. So, we're on a separated path here, and then we'll kind of come up a little hill, then we'll cross the ramp. This is the 580 eastbound off-ramp here to get onto kind of the approach pathway up to the bridge. So we'll kind of cross under this 580 overcrossing here, and then wrap up around, continuing west along the north side of 580. Heading toward the bridge. So this is, there's a little bit of climb here, but it's not so bad. It's about a half mile from Point Richmond to the bridge. Pretty pleasant. Sometimes some car noise here. Sometimes if you're coming in the morning, you'll see a big backup here on the left. And I will say you sometimes have to watch if there's been a storm, like we have when we're recording this. You do have to watch for some eucalyptus branches that will fall down in this pathway, but Caltrans is pretty good about cleaning them up in my experience.
Okay, and then speaking of that, if it is rainy, if there is wind, would you advise people to avoid biking across the bridge?
I will say that I've biked across it in all sorts of weather, and it's really not so bad. I would say the Golden Gate Bridge is a lot more challenging. The Golden Gate Bridge, you often have much more of a crosswind, which I think is actually kind of like more of a hazard for riding in. The Richmond-San Rafael Bridge is typically either a headwind or a tailwind, so you're either loving it or you're hating it, depending on which way you're going. But again, because it is a separated pathway and there are people who do walk out there, you probably won't see people walking if it's raining. It's not half so busy as like the Golden Gate Bridge is. So Even in kind of cruddy weather, it'll still get you there. I've never felt like, oh, it's a hazard at this point. I shouldn't be out here because it's too windy or rainy. I mean, there's certainly been a couple days when there was a wind advisory when I didn't. I think there was a day that a big rig got knocked over on the lower deck a couple years ago. I wouldn't be on there if there was a wind advisory, I guess, but really anything other than that, I think it'd be fine. And so now we've gotten onto the bridge. I think of the bridge in sort of like 3 different segments. If you're going westbound, it's a mile to get to the east tower, and then a mile to do the dip to the west tower, and then 2 miles down from there. So it's about a 4-mile trip in all, which is a hike. It's a long bridge, but again, as you see here, there are no cross streets, there's no obstacles, there's only a bollard on one end and the other. So you actually can kind of relax in this way, even though it is a bit of a long trip. And the hills aren't so steep. I think it's about a 1.75% grade at the greatest. Maybe it gets up to 2, but it's a pretty easy slope. And so you see we're going westbound here. Again, gorgeous views of San Pablo Bay on the right and the San Francisco Bay on the left and Mount Tamalpais ahead of us.
Why is it important to have bridge access for bicycles?
Bridges are just such an important part of infrastructure. Kind of more than a normal street, there isn't another way around. If you are not in a car or you're not riding the bus, there is no way to get across from the East Bay to the North Bay unless you ride, 30 miles out of the way up towards State Route 37 or like 80 miles out of the way down to Dumbarton Bridge. Again, you can take the ferry or you can take a bus, but the bus is like $7 or $8, which for a lot of people is fine, but actually to ride across it and back is twice the cost of a car toll. And so as a frequent rider of the bridge, I do see people out here who are making the trip for transportation all the time. Not every person on the bridge is a carbon bike with a riding kit on. It's people with a backpack and a couple of trash bags on their handlebars making a trip from Marin to Richmond or the other way. And having that access to bridges, opens it up to everybody who wants to use it, as opposed to saying this is only a bridge that works for you if you can wait for the bus or you can afford to take a car. And so for me, that is an equity issue where we need to make our transportation facilities work for everybody, regardless of whether they come to the system with a car.
A big reason for making this video is the fact that, is it the MTC?
Yeah, MTC, which is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, they're the Bay Area's regional government. They were kind of the initiator of what was proposed to be a 4-year pilot program for the multi-use path on the upper deck of the bridge. It's actually been about 5 years, but they have now decided that there weren't enough people riding on the bridge. They never said how many people would have been enough, but they have decided that whatever it was, it's not enough. And they want to retain the pathway for Fridays and weekends and actually move the barrier back against the bridge railing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. This would not be a third lane. It would merely be returning the bridge to its configuration pre-2019, which is 2 westbound lanes and a shoulder/breakdown lane. So, and I'll say, traffic on the bridge is bad because there are a lot of people commuting to jobs in Marin who can't afford housing in Marin. And so the typical traffic, even if MTC's plan goes forward, will be the same. The research has shown that the multi-use path has not made average traffic any worse. There will still be 2 westbound lanes. The one benefit that will accrue to drivers if MTC's plan goes through would be that when, on the days that there is a crash and that vehicle can be moved, you could move that vehicle into the shoulder and keep 2 westbound lanes instead of going down to 1. So there is a benefit that could happen some days at the cost of cutting off all bike pedestrian access on those days, Monday through Thursday.
If the MTC decides to limit access to 3 days a week, would this be a permanent decision?
So the way that they're framing it now is this would be a kind of 2-year extension of the existing pilot program, at which time they would evaluate the situation again. I will say there is a parallel effort, I'm not trying to get too wonky here, there's a parallel effort where MTC is doing the analysis to say what would it take for us to make that shoulder a third westbound lane. Legally, they can't make it a westbound lane like tomorrow. They couldn't do that as part of the pilot because they have to do the environmental impact report essentially before they could do that. I'm trying to get too full of acronyms and initialisms here. But they're kind of they have started that process. And so I think it's very much within the realm of possibility that at the end of this 2 years, they'll say, and actually we decided we want to make a third lane. And whether that third lane would even be compatible with a part-time multi-use path, I think is very much an open question. I don't know the answer to that. The bridge deck is tight. It's 36 feet. The barrier itself is 18 inches wide, and that's pretty tight for 3 lanes. So I think there's very much a possibility where they say, hey, we actually have to take the barrier off entirely. We have to make 3 westbound lanes. We'll provide a shuttle for some amount of hours a week, but we're taking away any bike ped access on the bridge. And it's very much a possibility. I can't see the future, but it looks like that is what the direction MTC wants to go in.
I see. And would they have to do an engineering study to make sure that's even possible?
Yeah. So what their current effort, it's called design alternatives analysis, is looking at, what strengthening does the bridge need to permit a 3rd lane, like a full bumper-to-bumper traffic, all these extra cars on the bridge. Does it need additional strengthening? What additional infrastructure is needed on the Marin side? Because if you go out there today, you'll see there's actually only 2 receiving lanes when you get over to Point San Quentin, where the bridge lands in Marin. So if you just said, okay, you can drive in the 3rd lane today, well, all you'd be doing is moving the backup over to Marin, where then people will be merging from 3 down to 2. And actually, Transportation Authority of Marin did an analysis on this a couple of years ago, saying, what would it take to provide this 3rd lane? And they show that you need to widen 580 on the Marin side to the cost of $90 million in 2021. So who knows what it is now. And even that would actually slow down some of the traffic going to southern Marin, so you had to add a whole additional freeway ramp, which would then blow the cost up to close to $1/3 billion. So we're talking about really a lot of money to solve traffic for how long? 2 years? A year? 6 months? This is an issue when you widen highways that are in high demand, is that people start making different choices. People who wouldn't have taken a trip at peak hour decide to take a trip at peak hour. People who would have decided to start getting their hair done in Richmond and say, oh, well, I'll keep my hairdresser in Marin. Or people take a job in Marin that they wouldn't have because traffic gets a little bit better. And then, sure, more people can make that trip, and there's a little more people who take jobs in Marin, but the traffic does get back to what it was before. We saw this in LA with the 405. LA Metro spent $1 billion widening it, and traffic was back to what it was before 6 months later.
Wow. So how many people are making the trip per day?
So MTC has an automated bike pedestrian counter on the bridge, and we see it varies by the time of year. In the summer, it's about 200 trips a day on a weekday and about double that on the weekend. And in the winter, it's about half on both, like 100 on a weekday, 200 on a weekend. Maybe it sticks around 300 on the weekends in the winter. And you see about a couple dozen people walking it. So it's not a huge number. The skeptics frequently point out, oh, well, you have to cut that number in half because everyone crossed the bridge 2 times. So actually, that's not the case. I think most people probably cross the bridge once. I mean, a lot of people, as you said you did, cross the bridge once, take the ferry home. Or there are a lot of people who do commute to the city via the bridge, and they'll do it in the morning in the winter or coming home in the summer. So without doing analysis, I wouldn't say this confidently, but I think at least half the trips, I think probably most of the trips are one-way trips. And I will say, it's not a huge number. It is about the number, as many people as we see on any of the MTC-owned bridges. So not Golden Gate Bridge, but it's as many people as we see biking on the Bay Bridge, and it's more people than we see on the Dunbar and the Carquinez and the Benicia Bridge. So despite being the longest of those bridges, it is the one that gets the most use.
Got it. Yeah, that really shows the value when you compare it to those other bridges.
And actually, there's a bunch of, if we saw in the video, there are a bunch of guys who fish on the Marin side, just on that first little half mile there.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, so it's not just about having access for people on bikes.
It really is a multi-use path.
Yeah, got it. What should viewers do in order to support maintaining bridge access 24/7?
So the final decision to determine the fate of the multi-use path on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge is going to come down to an agency called the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, or BCDC. This is kind of a not so well-known agency that has jurisdiction over the San Francisco Bay and everything within about 100 feet of it. So this is a project that they have final say on. And so MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, kind of needs sign-off from BCDC to move this plan forward. The BCDC board will make this decision. We're not sure when the meeting is going to be. It'll probably be sometime in January.
And this is January 2025?
January 2025, yeah. So it'll come down to a vote of that board. And I will say, we don't really know how it's going to go. We know there are some people who are allies. We know there are some people who are skeptics on that board. For people who are interested in having a voice and influencing that decision, the best thing to do is to get on the Bike East Bay petition and sign that. And they'll notify you when that decision is scheduled and let you know how best to participate. You'll be able to show up in person if you want to, or you'll be able to attend by Zoom, though sometimes the Zoom comments can get cut off, or you can send an email. So you can put the link for that petition in the video here so people can find that.
I will do that.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Warren.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is a delight.
All right.